Hey guys, tonight we are diving head first into the strange and frankly slightly baffling history of the Christmas mince pie, specifically why this sweet, festive treat was, for centuries, packed with actual, honest minus to minus goodness meat. And to do that, we're not just going to read about it. Oh no, you and I, we're going on a little trip back to 13th minus century England. A quick heads minus up, you probably wouldn't survive the first day. It's rustic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't the festive cheer, it's the cold, down, bone minus deep chill that the rough wool of your tunic does very little to stop. You pull the hood further over your head, the scratchy fabric rough against your ears. The second thing is the smell. It's a thick, earthy cocktail of wet soil, wood smell, and something vaguely animal, all clinging to the low minus hanging mist of a late December afternoon. You've just arrived. Welcome to the 13th century. Forget twinkling lights and paved, bustling high streets. You're standing on a track of churned mud, rutted and half minus frozen, that winds through a small village of what look like lopsided, mud minus and minus stick huts. This is wattle and daub. The wattle is a woven lattice of wooden strips, and the daub is a sticky concoction of wet soil, clay, sand, straw, and animal dung, smeared into the gaps. It's surprisingly effective, but it's not exactly a charming country cottage. Smoke curls lazily from simple holes in the thatched roofs, a constant reminder that inside every one of these dwellings, a small fire is the only thing keeping a family from freezing. This is the world that gave birth to the mince pie, and to understand the pie, you have to understand the hunger, the cold, and the sheer, grinding reality of this life. Christmas is coming, yes. The great feast of Christmas is a pinnacle of the year, but it's not a commercial season that starts after Halloween. It's a distant promise of light and warmth at the end of a long, dark tunnel. The rhythm of your life is dictated not by a shopping calendar, but by the sun and the church. And, right now, the sun is weak and the days are brutally short. You might be hoping for a picturesque dusting of snow to complete the Christmas card scene, but here, no. Snow isn't romantic. It's a silent, white menace. Snow isolates your tiny village, turning the already treacherous paths into impassable barriers. It makes gathering firewood a life minus or minus death struggle and can mean the end for any sheep or cattle you were slow to bring in. A white Christmas is a disaster. The villagers here, your new neighbors, are praying for a green Christmas, a mild and damp one, because that means survival. The whole idyllic, snowy Christmas concept is a much later invention, a romantic notion that would have seemed utterly insane to you right now. The church calendar promises that the feasting will last for 12 whole days, a glorious beacon of rest and, more importantly, food. It's the reward for a long period of pre-minus Christmas, fasting and hard autumn labor. But here's something historians still argue about: how much of that holiday did someone in your position actually get? For the north, up in his stone minus built manor house, it was certainly 12 days of feasting, politics, and entertainment. But for you, a tenant farmer with animals that need tending to every single day, regardless of what the calendar says, the line between sacred holiday and daily survival was incredibly blurry. The idea of a full 12 days off work was likely a fantasy. Did you get Christmas Day itself off? Probably. But the cow still needed milking on the 26th. You watch as a neighbor trudges past, a bundle of sticks on his back, his breath fogging in the frigid air. He gives you a brief, weary nod. The whole village seems to be moving in a state of weary anticipation. The work is endless, but the thought of the feast is a tiny flame of warmth in the cold. It's the promise of a full belly, of ale, of a brief, glorious pause in the struggle. And the centerpiece of that celebration, the ultimate festive food, is waiting in its various, precious parts in the one place that holds all your hopes for surviving the long winter ahead. You duck through the low doorway of your hut, leaving the damp shell behind. Inside, it's dark and hazy. A single, small fire pit in the center of the dirt floor offers a pulsing, orange glow and a surprising amount of warmth. The air is thick with smoke that stings your eyes as it slowly makes its way up to the simple hole in the roof. There are no windows, just a couple of wooden shutters that are firmly closed against the December cold. It's a single room, serving as kitchen, living room, and bedroom for your entire family. In one corner, a pile of straw and blankets is your bed. Your destination is the other corner, the most important part of the house, your larder. This isn't a tidy pantry with neat shelves. It's a small, sectioned off area, maybe a crude annex built onto the side of the hut, where the lack of fire keeps it colder than the main room. You push aside a heavy cloth curtain and step into the cool, musty darkness. The name larder, by the way, comes from the old French word for bacon or pork fat. That tells you everything you need to know about its primary, most glorious purpose. It's the realm of preserved meat. The first thing you see are the staples, the boring stuff. Sacks of grain, mostly oats and barley slumped against the wattle and stop wall. This is your lifeblood. This is the mountain of blandness you will have to get through before spring. It means endless bowls of pottage, a thick, loopy stew of boiled grains and whatever vegetables you can find. It means dense, heavy, dark bread, baked on a hot stone by the fire. This is what you eat on a normal Tuesday. It fills the belly, but it doesn't exactly spark joy. Historians with very serious faces and even more serious spreadsheets are still arguing about the precise diet of a 13th century English peasant. What was the exact ratio of bread to pottage? How many calories came from ale versus solid food? But they all agree on one thing. The vast majority of your intake was grain. Everything else was just a flavoring, a bonus, a luxury. Hanging from the low rafters are bunches of withered looking onions and leeks, their skins dry and papery. There might be a small pile of turnips or parsnips in a basket, their shapes gnarled and earthy. These are the hardy vegetables, the ones that can survive a few months in storage without turning to mush. Below them, a barrel gives off a powerful, pungent smell of brine and fear. This is your stock of salted herring, a vital source of protein, especially on Fridays and during the many fast days dictated by the church calendar, but hardly a delicacy. After months in the salt, it's tough, intensely fishy, and requires a lot of soaking to even be edible. In another, smaller barrel sits a wheel of hard, pale cheese. This is a brilliant, ancient method of preserving the goodness of milk long after the cow has gone dry for the winter. Beside it, a clay pot holds a store of salted butter. Fat is calories are warmth, and warmth is life. Nothing gets wasted. And then you see it, the king of the larder, hanging from a thick iron hook, away from the walls to deter mice, is a large side of bacon and perhaps a string of dull, lumpy sausages. This is your pig. A pig was a peasant's most prized possession. Unlike a cow, which needs pasture, a pig could be raised on household scraps, acorns, and whatever it could forage, and when it was slaughtered in the autumn, almost every single part of it could be preserved. The meat was heavily salted and then smoked for weeks in the chimney, turning it into a dense, fiber-packed resource that would last for months. This isn't meat for a casual sandwich. This is your wealth. It represents a whole season of careful saving and feeding. You wouldn't just slice some off for a regular meal. This is for special occasions. It's to be used sparingly, to flavor the giant pot of pottage, to give a sliver to a sick child, or to form the heart of a magnificent Christmas pie. You look at that slab of cured, smoked pork. That is the starting point. The very foundation of the mince pie is already the most valuable, calorie-dense, and flavorful food you own. It's a symbol of survival and modest prosperity. But to make it truly a Christmas pie, to elevate it from a simple farmer's dish into something worthy of the most important feast of the year, you need things that are not in this order. You need things that are not even from this country. You need things that are, ounce for ounce, more valuable than silver. And for that, you have to look east, far east, to transform your humble smoked pork into a dish worthy of the Son of God. You need magic, not actual magic. Of course, the church would have some very strong opinions about that, but the closest thing your world has to it. You need spices, and you don't just have them lying around. Getting them involves a journey, not feel, but for the spices themselves a journey so long, so dangerous, and so expensive that by the time they reach you, they are less a foodstuff and more a form of treasure. Let's be clear, you can't just pop down to the market. The market in your village is probably just a designated patch of mud where people trade eggs for a bit of leather. For spices, you have to wait for the fair, a great seasonal event where traveling merchants, those brave and mysterious figures who have actually seen a city, set up their stalls. Picture it. You arrive at the fair, a bustling, chaotic scene, and over in a corner, a merchant has a small, sturdy wooden chest. It's locked. When he opens it, he doesn't reveal heaps of goods, but a series of smaller, tightly sealed leather pouches or wooden boxes. He handles them like a jeweler handles diamonds. He has peppercorns from India, a pinch of saffron from the Middle East, maybe some ginger from China, and he has the holy trinity of Christmas spices: cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. You watch as he serves a wealthy customer perhaps the reeve from the manor house. He uses a tiny set of bronze scales, the kind you do use for weighing coins, to measure out a thimble of powder. The price he names is staggering. A single pound of nutmeg, for instance, costs the same as 3 or 4 sheep. A pound of pepper could literally buy a serf his freedom. You aren't buying a pound, you are buying a pinch. The few coins you've managed to save over months, the ones you are keeping for a new tool or a better pair of shoes, you hand them over for a tiny, precious, ridiculously expensive pile of brown dust. Why? To understand the cost, you have to understand the journey. That cinnamon didn't grow in a field just outside London. It began its life as the inner bark of a tree in Sri Lanka. Those cloves were the unopened flower buds of an evergreen tree that grew only on a few tiny volcanic islands in what is now Indonesia, the legendary Spice Islands. For centuries, nobody in Europe had any real idea where they came from. The Arab traders who controlled the first leg of the journey actively encouraged fantastical stories to protect their monopoly. They would tell wide-eyed European buyers that cinnamon was harvested from the nests of giant, mythical birds, or that pepper was grown in fields guarded by fiery dragons. Obviously, it made the spices seem even more rare and magical, and it kept prices sky-high. From the Spice Islands and India, the spices traveled on ships and in camel caravans, passing through countless hands. They were taxed at ports, traded in the markets of Baghdad and Alexandria, and finally, they reached the Mediterranean. And that's where the Republic of Venice came in. The Venetians built an empire by becoming the exclusive European distributor. They bought the spices from the traders in the Levant and then sold them on to the rest of Europe at an enormous markup. A Venetian merchant's fortune was built on nutmeg and cloves. From Venice, your little pinch of spice traveled over the Alps, up through the German states or France, across the English Channel, was sold to a London merchant, who then sold it to the traveling merchant, who has now sold it to you. Every single person on that chain, from the farmer in Indonesia to the man standing in front of you, took their cut. That's why it costs the same as a sheep. It's not just a spice. It's a story of global trade, of risk, of myth, and of incredible profit. Now, for a long time, the common assumption was that you and your medieval friends used these powerful spices to cover up the taste of meat that was starting to go bad. And it makes a certain kind of sense. But here's something historians still love to debate. Was it really for preservation? Or was it pure, unadulterated showing off? The argument against the bad meat theory is simple. If you were wealthy enough to afford a spoonful of cinnamon, you were more than wealthy enough to afford fresh meat. You didn't need to eat spoiled food. So, the prevailing theory now is that using spices was all about status. It was the medieval equivalent of wearing a designer watch or driving a luxury car. It was a way of saying, I am so successful that I can afford to sprinkle my food with this golden dust from the other side of the world. You hold the tiny, tightly wrapped parcel in your hand. It feels weightless, but you handle it as if it were a bag of gold. You can smell it, even through the cloth, a scent that is sweet, woody, and utterly alien in your world of wood, smoke, and damp earth. This isn't just a flavoring, it's a statement. It's the magic ingredient that will signal to everyone who tastes your pie that this is no ordinary day. This is Christmas, and it's a taste that carries with it an echo of a religious story that everyone, from the highest lord to the humblest farmer, would have known by heart. You carefully unwrap the tiny parcel of spices back in your smoky hut. The scent fills the small space, a warm, exotic perfume that momentarily overpowers the smell of damp earth and smoke. You have your 3 precious powders, the reddish minus brown of cinnamon, the dark, almost minus black of ground cloves, and the lighter, warmer brown of nutmeg. To you, in the 13th century, these aren't just random flavors that happen to taste nice together. They are a story. They are a sermon you can eat. The centerpiece of the Christmas story isn't just the manger scene. It's the arrival of the Magi, the 3 wise men, or kings, from the east. They followed a star to Bethlehem to honor the newborn King of the Jews. And what did they bring? They brought gifts. 3 gifts, to be precise: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Everyone listening to this story in a medieval church would know that these weren't just random expensive items. Each one had a deep symbolic meaning. Gold, the gift for a king; frankincense, a type of incense, a gift for a priest or a deity; and myrrh, an embalming oil, a gift that foretold Christ's eventual death and sacrifice, kingship, divinity, and death. Now, look at the spices in your hand. 3 of them. They come from the east. Just like the Magi, they are incredibly precious, a form of wealth. Just like gold, their scent is powerful and aromatic, filling the air when heated. Just like incense, it doesn't take a great leap of theological imagination to connect the dots. The spices in your pie are a direct, edible representation of the gifts of the Magi. This wasn't just some cute folk tradition. It was a widely understood piece of Christian symbolism. The 3 key spices, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, were seen as a way to honor Christ in your own home, with your own food. Every bite of the finished pie would be a physical reminder of that pivotal moment in the Nativity story. It's a brilliant piece of medieval branding, tying a worldly luxury directly to a sacred event. The very thing that made you look rich and important to your neighbors also made you feel pious and closer to God. The pie itself, which we'll get to building later, was often shaped in a long, oblong or rectangular form, not a circle. This was deliberate. It was meant to represent the manger, the wooden feeding trough where the baby Jesus was laid. Some bakers would even place a small pastry figure on top of the pie to represent the Christ child. So you have the spices representing the gifts, and the pie crust representing the manger. It's a full minus bro nativity scene on a plate. But here's a little wrinkle that modern home bakers might find interesting. The spices you have are probably not what you think they are. The term cinnamon in medieval England was a bit of a catch-all. What you're holding might be true cinnamon from Sri Lanka, but it's much more likely to be cassia, a cheaper, more robust relative from China. It has a similar flavor profile, but is less delicate and has more of a punchy, almost spicy heat to the medieval palate, which valued strong, powerful flavors. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. They weren't a culture of subtle notes and delicate aromas. They wanted a flavor that announced itself. And what about nutmeg? It has a sibling mace. Nutmeg is the hard inner seed of the fruit of the nutmeg tree, while mace is the lacy, bright red membrane, the aril that surrounds that seed. When dried, mace turns a lovely orangey-yellow and has a flavor that's similar to nutmeg, but more peppery and intense. In many medieval recipes, mace was even more highly prized than nutmeg. The 2 were often used together to create a more complex, layered flavor. So, your nutmeg might actually be a mix or you might have a tiny, even more expensive pinch of mace to add to the blend. The exact combination and ratio of these spices is something that historians and food enthusiasts still debate. Was there a standard, universally accepted Christmas spice blend? Almost certainly not. It would have varied hugely based on what the merchant had for sale that day, what you could afford, and your personal taste. Some recipes from the period also call for ginger, pepper, or even saffron to be included in the mix. The one constant, however, was the symbolism. You were adding the gifts from the east. You carefully mixed the precious powders together in a small wooden bowl. The smell is intoxicating. It's the smell of wealth, of faraway lands, of piety, and of the coming feast. This small bowl of brown dust is the soul of your Christmas pie. But before you can even think about combining it with the meat and baking it, there's a long, hungry period you have to endure first. The church, which gave you the beautiful story of the Magi, is also about to make you very, very hungry. The anticipation is about to begin. That glorious, fragrant bowl of spices has to wait. Your prized slab of bacon and your carefully rendered fat have to wait. The very idea of the feast has to wait. Because before the celebration comes the preparation. And in the medieval church, preparation meant one thing: fasting. You are now entering Advent. For you, Advent isn't about opening a little cardboard window each day to get a piece of chocolate. Advent is a period of penance and spiritual purification leading up to Christmas. It starts on the Sunday nearest to the Feast of Street, and drew at the end of November and runs right up until Christmas Eve. And for the devout, which you are expected to be, it involves a significant fast. Now, a medieval fast isn't necessarily about not eating at all. For most people, it's about abstaining from certain types of food. The big for no minus go items are meat, eggs, dairy products like milk, butter, and cheese. And this is the weirdest one to our modern minds: anything derived from a warm minus blooded animal, which specifically included animal fats like lard or suet. This is a culinary disaster. It means no bacon, no roasted meat, no cheese on your bread, no scrambling an egg for a quick meal, and crucially, no using delicious, flavorful animal fat to cook your vegetables. So, what can you eat? You're back to your basics. The great mountain of grain in your larder is your friend. Pottage, that thick, soupy stew of boiled oats and barley, becomes the centerpiece of every meal. You might flavor it with the onions and leeks from your store, or perhaps a few hardy greens from the garden if the winter has been mild, and lots of bread, dough, dense and filling. Your main source of protein during this time is fish. That barrel of salted herring in your larder is now a critical part of your diet. You'll be soaking it, boiling it, and probably getting very, very tired of it. If you live near a river, you might have access to fresh fish like pike, bream, or eels. Eels were incredibly popular in medieval England, often baked into pies using vegetable oil for the crust. Of course, for the wealthy, the options were much more glamorous. They could afford all sorts of imported preserved fish, and they had a clever loophole for their fasting days: anything that lived in water was often classified as fish. This led to some very creative interpretations. Beavers, with their scaly tails, were sometimes classified as fish. Puffins and barnacle geese, birds that spent much of their lives at sea, were also, conveniently, declared to be fish by some authorities. The question of what officially counted as fish was a hot topic of theological and culinary debate for centuries. For you, though, it's herring. Again, the ban on animal fat is the real challenge. Fat means flavor and satiety. Without it, food is bland and less filling. Your only alternative is oil. Most likely rapeseed oil or linseed oil pressed locally. It does the job, but it lacks the rich taste of butter or bacon fat. This period of culinary austerity makes the thought of the coming feast even more powerful. Every plain, fishy, oil-based meal you consume during Advent sharpens your craving for the richness of Christmas. The fasting wasn't just about food. Advent was meant to be a quiet, reflective time. The church discouraged overly boisterous celebrations, and things like weddings were generally forbidden during this period. It was a time to think about the coming of Christ, to attend church, and to purify your soul. But let's be realistic. For you, it was also just hard. The days are at their shortest and darkest. The weather is at its coldest and dampest, and the food is at its most boring. It's a physical and psychological marathon. The very name for Christmas in your language, Christ's Mass, refers to the special church service that marks the end of all this. The Christmas Eve Mass is the finish line. As you sit in the cold, dark church, hungry and tired, the service marks the official end of the Advent fast. The moment the Mass is over, in the very early hours of Christmas morning, the feast can begin. The psychological release must have been immense. It's not just a holiday, it's a deliverance. So you wait, you endure the pottage, you get through the salted fish, you watch the sun set a little earlier each day, and you dream. You dream of the taste of roasted meat, you dream of the richness of butter, and you dream of that special, once minus a minus year creation, the pie that contains everything you're not allowed to have right now. Meat, fat, and the sweet, exotic promise of those expensive spices. The fast isn't just a religious obligation. It's the marketing campaign. It creates a desperate, ravenous desire for the product. And after long weeks of this, you are more than ready for the payoff. The 12 days of feasting are about to begin. The final bell of the Christmas Eve midnight Mass rings out across the frozen fields, and the sound is electric. It's a starting gun. The long, dreary period of Advent is officially over. The fast is broken. As you spill out of the small stone church into the frigid night air, the mood has completely transformed. The quiet, solemn reflection of the past for weeks is gone, replaced by a palpable buzz of excitement and relief. The 12 days of Christmas have begun. This isn't just a figure of speech from a song. For you, the 12 days of Christmas is a literal, legally minus recognized holiday period. It runs from Christmas Day, December 25th, right through to Epiphany on January 6th. This is the great winter festival, the one time of the year when, in theory, all normal work stops. For the Lord of the Manor, it's a non-stop house party. For you, it's a precious, desperately needed break from the relentless grind of agricultural life. The cow still needs milking, yes, but the plow can rest in the shed. You hurry back to your hut, where the fire has been built up, and the feasting begins immediately, even in a humble cottage like yours. The Christmas morning breakfast is a moment of pure indulgence. After weeks of salted fish and oak gruel, the taste of something fried in real animal fat is heavenly. You might have a little of your precious bacon, sizzled over the fire, and perhaps some eggs. If your hens are still laying, it's a simple meal, but it feels like the most luxurious food on earth. The entire 12-day period is punctuated by food. It's a time to consume the bounty of the autumn harvest in the pig you slaughtered. It's a marathon of eating, drinking, and merrymaking designed to get you through the bleakest part of the year. The centerpiece of this, especially on Christmas Day itself, is your pie, but it's not the only star of the show. If you were invited to the manor house perhaps because you hold a certain position in the village, or simply because the Lord is feeling generous, you would witness a feast on an entirely different scale. The great hall would be decked with evergreen branches, holly, ivy, and mistletoe, their green a vibrant promise of life in the dead of winter. A massive Yule log, a whole tree trunk, would be burning in the great hearth, large enough to smolder for the entire festival. The tables would groan under the weight of food. At the very top of the hierarchy of dishes would be a roast peacock, painstakingly dressed in its own iridescent feathers. Whereas what? But the true showstopper, the ultimate medieval Christmas dish, was the boar's head, carried into the hall on a giant platter, often with a roasted apple in its mouth. Its arrival would be announced with a special carol, the Boar's Head Carol. This tradition was a nod to the old pagan customs of sacrificing a boar to the Norse god Freyr at the winter solstice, now safely repackaged for a Christian audience. Historians are still debating how much of this pagan survival was a conscious continuation of old beliefs versus just, well, a tradition that people kept because it was fun. Were people in the 13th century thinking about the god Freya when they saw the boar's head? Or were they just thinking? Excellent. First Paul, the consensus leans towards the latter, but the echo of older, pre-Christian winter festivals is undeniable. Back in your own home, your feast is humbler but follows the same principles: meat and richness. You might have a roasted goose if your family was fortunate enough to have one. And, of course, there is the pie. Your special pie, the one you've been preparing for, will be baked and served. It's not a dessert. It's a substantial part of the main meal, a dense, rich, and intensely flavorful dish that combines meat, bread, fruit, and spice all in one pastry case. And there would be drinking, lots of drinking. Ale would flow freely. For the slightly wealthier, there would be wine, and a special Christmas drink called lasmo, made from hot ale or cider mixed with roasted apples, sugar, and spices. The name likely comes from the frothy, woody head on the drink. It was served in a large communal wassail bowl, and drinking from it was part of a ritual of wishing good health, wise heil, in Old English to your neighbours for the coming year. This period was a time of social inversion, a deliberate, temporary turning of the world upside minus down. Games, music, and dancing, things that were frowned upon for much of the year, were now encouraged. It was a time for mummers' plays, strange folk dramas with recurring characters like Street, George and the Dragon, performed by villagers in bizarre costumes. It was a pressure valve for a rigidly hierarchical society. For 12 days, you could feast, drink, and be merry, and at the heart of your personal feasting, the dish that perfectly encapsulates the story, the luxury, and the sheer relief of the season, is the one you are now finally ready to build. The time has come. Advent is over. The feasting has begun, and all your precious, hard minus one ingredients are assembled. It's time to build your Christmas pie. The first step, and in many ways the most structurally important, is the pastry. But you need to forget everything you know about modern pastry. Forget light, flaky, buttery crusts that shatter when you look at them. This is not that. This is medieval engineering. Your pastry has a very specific job description. It's not just there to be delicious. It's a container. It's an edible cooking pot and preservation vessel all in one. The flour you're using is likely a rough, whole minus grain flour. Maybe wheat if you're fortunate, but it could easily be a mix of rye or even barley. It's not the fine, snow minus weight, low minus protein flour a modern baker would use for a delicate tart. You mix this coarse flour with a simple combination of hot water and fat. The fat is key. It could be lard-rendered pork fat or, more likely for this kind of structural pastry, soup the hard, crumbly fat from around the kidneys of a cow or sheep. You heat the water and fat together until the fat melts. Then you pour it into the flour and work it quickly into a stiff, pliable dough. It feels a bit like warm clay minus dough. This is called a hot water crust, and it's designed for strength, not delicacy. Now for the name. In your time, this pastry case isn't called a crust. It's called a coffin. That's C minus O minus F minus I minus N. It's an older English spelling of the word coffin, and it shares the same root as the word coffer, meaning a strong cups for valuables. To you, the word doesn't have the morbid, funereal connotations it does today. It simply means a box, a case, a container to hold something precious. And in this case, the precious thing is your rich, spiced meat filling. So you are, quite literally, baking a small coffin for your Christmas filling. The shape is deliberate. As we touched on before, you're not making a round pie. You pinch and pull and shape the wall, figuring dough into a long, rectangular box with high, straight sides. You're building the manger. This is functional architecture. The walls need to be thick and strong enough to stand up on their own, without a pie dish to support them. There were no disposable aluminum pie pans in the 13th century. The pastry case is the dish. You work the dough with your hands, pressing it out on a floured wooden board, then raising the walls and sealing the corners, ensuring there are no cracks or weak spots. It's more like pottery than baking. Here's a quirky detail that food historians uncovered by studying old manuscripts and illustrations. These coffins were often not eaten, at least not in the wealthiest households. For a great lord's feast, the pastry case was seen as a disposable cooking vessel. The lord and his high-able guests would eat the rich filling, and the tough, often soot-blackened pastry case would be given to the servants or the poor waiting at the gates. It was, in effect, edible Tupperware. For you, in your humble hut, it's a different story. Nothing gets wasted. The soot-and flour crust is packed with calories and flour from the filling that is soaked into it during baking. You and your family will be eating the coffin, and you'll be glad of it. Once the main box is formed, you would also roll out a lid to place on top after the filling is in. This lid is where a baker could get creative. You might score a pattern into it, or use leftover dough to create simple decorative shaped sleeves, stars, or perhaps a lettuce pattern. And as mentioned, the most devout or ostentatious bakers would fashion a small figure of the baby Jesus out of pastry to lay on top, making the symbolism of the manger minus pie impossible to miss. Historians still debate how widespread this baby on a pie practice really was. Was it a common folk tradition, or was it something only mentioned in a few specific texts and exaggerated over time? It's hard to say for certain, as pastry decorations don't tend to survive in the archaeological record, but the rectangular manger shape is much more consistently referenced. It was the standard form for this type of celebratory pie for centuries. You stand back and look at your creation. A sturdy, pale, doughy box. It looks rough and rustic, nothing like the neat, machine-made pie shells of the future. But it's strong. It's ready to be filled with the most luxurious mixture of ingredients you can possibly assemble. It's a container built to hold the very essence of Christmas. Now, for the paradox that goes inside it. Now you turn to the heart of the matter, the filling. This is where the real magic happens. A culinary collision of flavors that would seem utterly bizarre to most people today. You are about to create a mixture that is salty, fatty, sweet, spicy, and fruity, all at the same time. It's a riot of sensations, and every single ingredient has a purpose. First, the meat. You take down your side of smoked, cured bacon, or a piece of preserved mutton. This isn't fresh, tender meat. It's been salted and smoked to last through the winter, making it dense, dry, and intensely flavorful. Your first job is to chop it, and you chop it very, very finely. The word mince in your time literally means to chop small. You're not grinding it in a machine. You're using a sharp knife and a lot of elbow grease, hacking away at the tough, salty meat on a thick wooden board until it's broken down into tiny pieces. Sometimes, recipes would call for boiling the salted meat first to soften it and remove some of the excess salt. But the core principle is the same: small, minced pieces. This is the savory, salty, umami foundation of the pie. It's the source of protein and the most valuable ingredient in the mix. But you're not just using the lean muscle. The fat is just as important. You add suet. This is the hard, crumbly, white fat from around the kidneys and loins of cattle or sheep. You chop this finely too. The suet will melt during baking, basting the meat and fruit, keeping everything moist, and adding an incredible richness and a huge hit of calories. Next, you add the sweet. This is where the fruit comes in. You don't have access to fresh, sugary fruits in December. Your fruit is preserved, just like your meat. You have dried fruits, imported from warmer climates, that you would have bought at the same fair where you got your spices. Raisins, cold raisins of Corinth or currants, dates, and prunes are the most common. These are luxury items, not everyday snacks. They are intensely sweet, and their natural sugars provide a powerful contrast to the saltiness of the meat. You chop them up and add them to the bowl. The sweetness isn't for dessert. It's a key part of the main flavor profile. This combination of meat and fruit is a hallmark of medieval European cuisine, especially for the wealthy. It was a taste inherited from Roman and Persian cooking, a love for the sweet and sour agro-dolce profile. Sugar wasn't readily available or cheap, so dried fruit was the primary way to add intense sweetness to a dish. Pairing it with expensive meat was a sign of a sophisticated palate and a healthy bank account. Now for the final, magical touch, your bowl of spices. You sprinkle the cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg mixture over the meat, fat, and fruit. You might also add a pinch of black pepper for heat or a thread of saffron for a golden color and hay-like aroma. If you were particularly wealthy, the spices tie everything together. They're warm, aromatic notes bridge the gap between the salty meat and the sweet fruit, creating a complex and harmonious whole. You mix everything together in a large bowl. Look at it. It's a chunky, speckled paste of dark meat, white fat, and jewel-minor stone-dried fruits, all coated in fragrant brown spices. To a modern eye, it might look a bit strange, but to you, it's the height of luxury. It's a dish that engages every part of the palate. Here's a detail that often gets lost: preservation. This weird combination wasn't just for taste. It was a brilliant feat of pre-refrigeration food science. The salt in the meat, the huge amount of sugar in the dried fruit, the soot fat creating an almost airtight seal, and the spices, many of which have natural antibacterial properties, all work together to make this filling incredibly shelf-stable. They properly made, well-baked mince pie could last for weeks, even months, in a cool larder. It was a way of preserving your most valuable ingredients in a delicious, ready-to-eat form. Historians still debate the primary motivation for this recipe. Was it flavor first? A genuine love for this salty-sweet-spicy combination? Or was it driven by the practical need for preservation? The most likely answer is that it was both. People wouldn't have kept making something for centuries if it didn't taste good to them. The fact that it was also a brilliant way to preserve food was a massive, essential bonus. They created a dish that was simultaneously a status symbol, a festive delicacy, and a practical survival tool. You scoop the dense, fragrant mixture into the pastry coffin you built earlier, packing it in tightly. The juxtaposition is perfect. A humble, rustic pastry case made from flour, water, and fat, now filled with a treasure trove of ingredients from all over the known world. It's high-end and low-end, local and global, all in one dish. You place the pastry lid on top, crimp the edges to seal it, and your pie is almost ready for the fire. But there's one ingredient in that filling that deserves its own moment in the spotlight, a forgotten hero of the British kitchen. Let's take a moment to pay our respects to the unsung hero of this entire operation: soup. In that bowl of rich, spiced filling, the meat gets the credit for being the main event and the spices get the glory for being exotic. But it's the soup, the whole, crumbly fat from a cow or a sheep, that is quietly doing some of the most important work. Without it, your mince pie would be a dry, sad, and short-lived affair. Today, soup is a niche ingredient, something you might only seek out once a year to make a traditional Christmas pudding, or, if you're very old-fashioned, a steak and kidney pie. To you, in the 13th century, soup is a kitchen staple, a cornerstone of cooking, and a vital source of energy. It's the solid, white fat found around the animal's kidneys and loins. Unlike lard, which is the softer, smoother fat from a pig, soup is hard and crumbly at room temperature. It has a higher melting point, and this property is what makes it so uniquely brilliant for pastries and puddings. You would have rendered the soup yourself. After the butchering of a cow or sheep, you would carefully remove these large lobes of fat. The next step is to clarify it, grating or chopping the raw soup and then melting it gently over a low heat with a little water. The pure fat melts and separates from any bits of tissue or membrane. You then strain this liquid fat and let it cool. As it cools, it solidifies into a clean, white, solid block of pure fat. This block is incredibly stable, stored in a cool, dark place. It can last for months without going rancid, providing you with a reliable source of cooking fat long after the fresh meat is gone. In your mince pie filling, soup performs several critical functions. First, moisture. The minced meat you're using is often dry from the curing process. As the pie bakes, the suit slowly melts, releasing its fat throughout the entire fillet. It bastes the meat and fruit from the inside out, keeping everything succulent and preventing it from turning into a dry, dense brick. It creates a rich, juicy texture that lard, with its lower melting point, wouldn't achieve in quite the same way. Second, flavor. Suit has a subtle, savory, almost beefy flavor that enriches the entire pie. It's a deep, satisfying taste that complements the salty meat and provides a savory baseline that balances the sweetness of the fruit and spices. It adds a certain gravitas to the filling. Third, and perhaps most importantly, preservation. Once the pie is baked and has cooled down, the melted suit in the filling solidifies again. It coats every piece of meat and fruit in a thin layer of fat, effectively sealing it off from the air. This process, known as potting, was a common preservation method. By creating this fatty, airtight environment within the pie, you dramatically extend its shelf life. Your Christmas pie isn't just a meal, it's a larder item. You could, in theory, be eating slices of this pie well into January or February. Here's a curious culinary detail that modern science has helped us understand better the texture. Because suit is a hard fat that is grated or chopped into small pieces. It doesn't just melt into a puddle. The little pieces of fat are distributed throughout the filling or a pastry dough. When heated, they melt and create tiny pockets of air. This is what gives a traditional suit pudding its light, spongy texture. In your mince pie filling, it contributes to a much more pleasant mouthfeel than if you had simply mixed in a softer fat. Food historians still occasionally bicker about the finer points of medieval fats. When would a cook have chosen suit over lard, or lard over butter? The lines were often blurry, and it frequently came down to availability and cost. But the general consensus is that for long minus-cooked dishes, boiled puddings, and pies with a long shelf life, suit was the undisputed champion. Its high melting point and neutral minus to minus savory flavor made it the perfect choice. Lard was prized for frying and for shorter, richer pastry, while butter, being a dairy product and more perishable and forbidden during fasts, was a greater luxury. The very word suit has an un-seem ring to it, coming from an old Anglo-Norman French word, which itself derives from the Latin sebum, meaning tallow or grease. It's a word and an ingredient that has been central to British cooking for well over 1,000 years. Its decline in the 20th century, replaced by hydrogenated vegetable shortenings and other fats, represents one of the biggest shifts in modern culinary history. So as you pack your filling into its pastry coffin, give a little nod of respect to the unassuming white specks of fat mixed in there. They are the guardians of flavor, the providers of moisture, and the silent preservers. They ensure that your pie is not just a treat for Christmas Day, but a source of rich, festive energy that will help carry your family through the darkest, coldest weeks of the year. This pie isn't just for you. In a world of strict social obligations, a pie of this quality is also a statement, and sometimes a requirement. Your magnificent pie is finally assembled. The pastry coffin is filled, the lid is on, and the whole thing is ready for baking. You don't have a modern oven with precise temperature controls. You have a fire. Baking might mean placing the pie on a hot, fat stone near the embers, or if you're slightly more advanced, in a cast-iron Dutch oven nestled directly in the coals, with more coals piled on the lid. It's a smoky, imprecise, and highly skilled process. As the pie bakes, the smell is incredible. The savory aroma of the meat and melting suit, the sweet scent of the fruit, and the warm, exotic perfume of the spices all mingle with the wood smoke from the fire. It's the smell of Christmas, wealth, and celebration concentrated into one glorious dish. But this pie might not be destined for your family's table alone. In the rigidly structured world of medieval England, a pie like this is also a form of currency. It's a tribute. It's your rent. You are likely a tenant farmer, living on land owned by a lord. This lord could be a minor knight, a powerful baron, or a great monastery. In exchange for the right to live on and work your small plot of land, you owe him a certain number of days of labor each year. a portion of your grain harvest, and often a tribute of food at key festivals. And Christmas is the most important festival of all. On Christmas Day, the lord of the manor would hold a great feast in his hall for his family, his retainers, and his most important tenants. Part of the tradition, and often a legal requirement of the tenancy agreement, was for the tenants to contribute to this feast. This was known as Scot minus sale or a contribution feast. You wouldn't just show up empty minus handed. You had to bring a gift, and the quality of that gift was a direct reflection of your status and your respect for the Lord. And what better gift than your Christmas pie? A single pie contains all the elements of a high minus status offering. It contains meat, a valuable commodity. It contains suit, a sign of a healthy animal. It contains imported, expensive dried fruit, and most importantly, it contains spices, the ultimate medieval wine, presenting a large, well-made, and fragrant mince pie to your lord is a way of fulfilling your obligation in the most impressive way possible. It says, I am a good and successful tenant. I respect your authority, and I can afford to bake with cinnamon. The size and quality of the pies were often a public affair. You and the other villagers would bring your offerings to the manor house, and they would be displayed before being consumed. There was an unspoken competition. A larger pie, a more elaborate pastry decoration, or a more fragrant waft of spice could enhance your standing in the eyes of the lord and your neighbors. A small, sad looking pie might turn you scorn or, worse, the displeasure of the man who controlled your livelihood. Inside the great hall, the pies would be part of a vast spread of food, and here, another layer of hierarchy revealed itself. The most elaborate and impressive pies, perhaps ones containing not just minced meat but whole birds, like partridge or woodcock, nestled inside would be placed on the high table where the lord and his family sat. The lesser pies, still impressive but perhaps smaller or with fewer spices, would go to the lower tables for the less important guests. The quality of the pie you ate literally depended on where you were sitting. There is a fascinating historical debate around this practice. Was this gift of a pie a genuine expression of festive goodwill, a happy tradition of sharing? Or was it, at its core, another form of taxation, a burdensome obligation that stretched the resources of poor families at a difficult time of year? The answer, as is often the case in history, is probably a bit of both. For some, it may have been a point of pride. For others, it was undoubtedly a source of anxiety. The pressure to produce a pie worthy of the Lord's table could be immense. Old manorial records sometimes list the exact gifts expected from tenants at Christmas, and they often include things like one hen, a measure of oats, and sometimes, specifically, a pie. So as your pie bakes, you might be feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. This isn't just dinner. It's a performance review. It's a social statement. It's a carefully crafted piece of culinary diplomacy. The success of this single dish could influence how your lord and his officials treat you for the rest of the year. In a world with few safety nets, that was a very big deal indeed. But the Lord's feast, while important, was only one part of the 12-day Christmas chaos. The pie had another, much stranger role to play in the festivities. Once the formal, hierarchical feast at the manor house is over, the real Christmas chaos can begin. The 12-day holiday period wasn't just about solemn church services and respectful gift-giving to your social superiors. It was also a time for a very peculiar and cherished tradition, the temporary overthrow of all social order. This was the reign of the Lord of Misrule. At the beginning of the Christmas season, a person would be chosen often by lot, by drawing a bean from a cake, or by popular vote to preside over the festivities. This person was not the actual lord of the manor, but his opposite, a common villager, a servant, or a lowly courtier, who was crowned the Lord of Misrule, the Abbot of Unreason, or the King of the Bean, of the 12 days of Christmas. His word was law, and his law was laughter, nonsense, and topsy-turvy fun. The Lord of Misrule and his noisy, costumed followers would take over the village, the manor house, and even the churchyard. They would stage mock sermons, organize games and dances, demand fines of food and drink from their neighbors, and generally turn the world upside down. The real lord and the village priest were expected to play along, at least outwardly, and accept the authority of this temporary king of chaos. It was a sanctioned period of anarchy, a societal pressure valve that allowed the frustrations and absurdities of a rigid class system to be aired and satirized in a controlled, festive environment. And what did the Lord of Misrule and his rowdy court eat? They ate what they demanded. They would parade from house to house, singing, making noise, and demanding tribute. A slice of your freshly baked Christmas pie, and a tankard of your best ale, was the expected toll. Your pie, which had been a symbol of deference to the real Lord, now became a tribute to the fake Lord, a fuel for the Carnivalesque rebellion. Imagine the scene. I knock at your door, not from a neighbor, but from a bizarre procession. The Lord of Misrule is wearing a crown of wholly and ridiculous, oversized gown. His companions are dressed as hobby horses, dragons, or wild men covered in leaves. They are singing loudly and out of tune. You offer them a piece of your pie not out of fear, but as part of the game. It's your contribution to the collective madness that has gripped the village. The mince pie was the perfect fuel for this kind of activity. It was portable, calorie-minus dense, and could be eaten with your hands. It was the medieval equivalent of a high-minus energy bar, a perfect snack for a roving band of merrymakers. In some of the grander houses, a single, enormous pie would be baked, a true centerpiece for the Lord of Misrule's court. These could be gigantic, containing all sorts of different meats and fruits, and their presentation and consumption were a key part of the day's entertainment. This tradition of Misrule has very deep roots, and historians still argue about its precise origins. Is it a direct descendant of the Roman festival of Saturnalia, where masters and slaves would switch roles for a day? Or is it a homegrown medieval invention? The truth is likely a muddle of both. The idea of a midwinter festival involving role minus reversal and license chaos is a very old one, and it was cleverly absorbed and tolerated by the medieval church as a way of keeping the population happy during a long and difficult season. Of course, it didn't always go smoothly. There are plenty of records of things getting out of hand. Lords of Misrule who took their power a little too seriously, demanding outrageous fines or causing actual damage. Church authorities, particularly the more puritanical ones, frequently complained about these heathenish practices. The shameful unruly lines hastened the mockery of all things sacred, but for several centuries, the tradition held strong. It was seen as a necessary, for the most part, harmless part of the Christmas joy. So your pie, this single dish, embodies the two opposite poles of medieval Christmas. It is, on the one hand, a symbol of the established hierarchy, a respectful gift from a tenant to his lord. On the other hand, it's a snack for rebels, a food that fuels the temporary dissolution of that very same hierarchy. It's a food of order and a food of chaos. But as the Middle Ages waned and a new era dawned, this world of misrule and manger minus shaped pies began to change. England was getting richer. New ingredients were becoming available, and a new dynasty, the Tudors, would bring with them a new level of extravagance and a powerful sweet tooth that would begin to alter the very soul of your Christmas pie. The balance of power inside that pastry coffin was about to shift. You blinked, and the world around you has changed. The smoky, crafty waffle minus and minus daub hut has been replaced by something a little sturdier, perhaps with proper timber, framing and maybe even a few small panes of greenish glass in a window. It's the 16th century now. You're living in Tudor England, the age of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Life is still hard, no question, but for many, there's a growing sense of prosperity, and you can taste it. The Christmas pie is still a centerpiece of the holiday feast, but it's starting to evolve. It's becoming grander, richer, and noticeably sweeter. The biggest change is the arrival of sugar. Of course, sugar existed in the 13th century, but it was an almost mythical substance, an obscenely expensive medicine sold by the ounce. By the Tudor period, thanks to the establishment of sugar-cane plantations in places like Madeira and the Canary Islands, a dark history of exploitation in itself, the supply of sugar to Europe had increased dramatically. It was still a luxury, a major status symbol, but it was now something a prosperous merchant or a well-to-do yeoman farmer might aspire to use in their festive baking. This new ingredient begins to challenge the dominance of the meat in your pie. Recipes from the Tudor era show a clear shift in the balance of the filling. While minced meat, often mutton or veal, is still a key component, the quantity of fruit and, crucially, added sugar starts to increase. The pie is moving along the flavor spectrum, away from being a purely savory minus spicy minus meaty dish towards something more akin to a sweetened meat dish. You would now be adding not just a spoonful of honey or the sweetness of dried fruit, but actual crystalline sugar, a sign of true sophistication. This sugar didn't just add sweetness, it was also a fantastic preservative, further enhancing the pie's already impressive shelf life. The list of ingredients in a wealthy Tudor household's mince pie would be dazzling. Alongside the familiar mutton, suet, currants, and dates, you might find candied citrus peel, orange, and lemon, a much more extravagant and fashionable ingredient than simple dried prunes. The spice mix would become more complex, with ginger, mace, and pepper playing a stronger role, and the whole mixture would be drenched in alcohol. A generous slug of sack, a type of Spanish sherry or a good English ale, would be poured into the mix, adding another layer of flavor and, you guessed it, more preservative power. The pies themselves got bigger and more elaborate. The simple manger shape started to give way to more fanciful creations, especially in aristocratic kitchens. Bakers would create pies in the shape of stars, flowers, or heraldic symbols. These were no longer just coffins. They were elaborate pastry sculptures designed to be the show-stopping centerpiece of the Christmas feast. They were subtleties, edible artworks designed to surprise and delight the guests. Here's a quirky detail from the period the name Mince starts to get company. You see them referred to as shred pies or 3D pies. This is just a reflection of the preparation method. Shred and mince were used interchangeably to mean finely chopped. So, if you came across a recipe for a shred pie in a Tudor cookbook, you'd know it was our familiar friend. This growing sweetness reflects a broader change in the English palate. The Tudors had a notoriously sweet tooth. Queen Elizabeth I, for example, loved sugary treats so much that her teeth were reportedly black by the end of her life, a feature that some ladies at court apparently tried to emulate by deliberately blackening their own teeth to look fashionable. In this environment, a sweeter, more decadent pie was a sign that you were in tune with the latest culinary trends. Historians are still debating the exact moment the pie tipped from being meat with some fruit to fruit with some meat. It wasn't a single event, but a slow, gradual evolution over more than a century. The Tudor period is a crucial part of this transition. The pie is still recognizably a meat dish, but the seeds of its future sweet identity are being sown, generously sprinkled with sugar and candied peel. The pie is fatter, sweeter, and more alcoholic than its medieval ancestor. It's a reflection of a nation that is becoming more outward-looking, more involved in global trade, and more obsessed with conspicuous consumption. The humble peasant's pie, a tribute to the lord of the manor, has become a merchant's showpiece, a declaration of new wealth. But this golden age of extravagant, meaty, sugary Christmas pies was about to run head first into a wall of religious austerity unlike anything the country had seen before. The party was about to be shut down. The sweet, boozy, decadent Christmas pie of the late Tudor and early Stuart period had become the undisputed king of the festive table. But a shadow was growing in England, a movement that looked upon all this feasting and merrymaking not with joy, but with deep suspicion and outright hostility. The pie, in all its spice, meaty glory, was about to become a symbol of everything they despised. The Puritans were coming. You are now in the early 17th century. The religious landscape of England is a battlefield. The Protestant Reformation, which began a century earlier, has splintered into different factions. On one side, you have the established Church of England, which retains many of the ceremonies, decorations, and festival days of the old Catholic faith. On the other side are the Puritans. These were devout, Radical Protestants who believed the Church of England hadn't gone far enough. They wanted to purify it of all its remaining Catholic trappings. To a Puritan, a church should be a plain, whitewashed room, not a place of stained glass, statues, and incense. A sermon should be a long, intellectual exploration of Scripture, not a ritualistic ceremony, and religious devotion should be expressed through sober living, hard work, and quiet contemplation, not through noisy, drunken festivals. And what was Christmas? To them, it was the most corrupt festival of all. They had several major problems with it. First, they argued correctly that the Bible never specifies December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth. They saw it as a human invention, a popish superstition with no scriptural basis. Second, they detested the name. Christmas contains the word Mass, the Catholic term for the Eucharist service. To a Puritan, the Mass was a blasphemous ritual, and naming a holiday after it was unacceptable. They preferred to call the day, if they acknowledged it at all, simply Christ minus died. Third, and most damningly, they hated the way it was celebrated. The 12 days of feasting, the drinking, the wassailing, the Lord of Misrule. The mummers' plays, they saw all of it as a disgusting cocktail of pagan hedonism and Catholic idolatry. It was a season of gluttony, drunkenness, and idleness, a time when people should be working and praying. And the mince pie? The mince pie was the perfect symbol of everything they hated, all baked into one convenient, edible package. It was sin on a plate. Think about it from their perspective. A pie was ostentatiously rich and luxurious, a clear example of the sin of gluttony. Its connection to the festive season made it a food of idleness. And, worst of all, it was dripping with popish symbolism, the traditional manger shape, the spices representing the gifts of the Magi, the pastry baby Jesus on top. This was idolatry. This was worshipping a baked good. They called them idol minus pies in dill. To eat a mince pie at Christmas was, in their eyes, to participate in a Catholic superstition. This view wasn't just held by a few fringe extremists. It was a powerful political and social movement. Puritan preachers railed against Christmas from the pulpit. Pamphleteers wrote long, angry tracts denouncing the superstitious and idolatrous celebration of the season. One famous pamphlet from 1644, The Arraignment, Conviction and Imprisoning of Christmas, personifies Christmas as an old, sinful delinquent being put on trial for his crimes against the nation. Historians still debate how much this anti-minus Christmas sentiment had penetrated the general population before the English Civil War. Was the average villager in the 1632s really starting to feel guilty about their Christmas pie? Or was this largely a preoccupation of the educated, politically engaged, and intensely religious minority? The evidence suggests that for most people, Christmas was still a beloved tradition. They loved the break from work. They loved the feasting, and they loved their pies. But the Puritan movement was gaining power in Parliament. They were organized, they were vocal, and they were determined. The mince pie, which had been a symbol of community, of wealth, of pious celebration, and even of festive chaos, was now being recast as something sinister. It was becoming politicized. To bake and eat a Christmas pie was increasingly a statement of where you stood in the great religious and cultural divide that was splitting the country in two. It was a declaration of loyalty to the old ways, to the king, and to the established church. It was an act of defiance against the sober, plain, and scripture-minus obsessed world the Puritans wanted to build. The stage was set for a full minus-scale culture war, and the humble mince pie was right on the front line. Soon, it would go from being an act of defiance to an act of outright illegality. The government was about to do the unthinkable. They were going to cancel Christmas. The year is 1647. The king, Charles I, is a prisoner. The English Civil War has been won by the parliamentarian forces, the Roundheads, led by staunch Puritans like Oliver Cromwell. The old world of bishops, lavish court ceremony, and royal authority has been shattered. And now, the victors are ready to reshape the nation in their own sober, godly image, and their sights are set firmly on Christmas. In June of 1647, Parliament passes an ordinance that officially abolishes the feasts of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun. It's not a suggestion. It's the law of the land. The ordinance declares that these festivals are superstitious and have been used as an excuse for carnal and sensual delights. It orders all shops and markets to remain open on December 25th. It encourages citizens to treat the day as just another working day. There ought to be no special church services, no decorations, no festivities. Christmas is, for all intents and purposes, cancelled. You wake up on the morning of December 25th, and it's supposed to be just another Wednesday. The church bells are silent. The town crier is ordering shopkeepers to open their doors under penalty of a fine. Soldiers might be patrolling the streets, on the lookout for any signs of illegal merriment. This is the new reality of the English Commonwealth. But you can ban a festival. You can't ban a feeling. For millions of people, this wasn't just the cancellation of a holiday. It was an attack on their culture, their traditions, and their faith. The ban was deeply, deeply unpopular, and it sparked a wave of quiet, and sometimes not minus quiet, resistance. And what became the ultimate symbol of this resistance? The mince pie. To bake a mince pie, to fill your house with that familiar, festive smell of meat and spice and fruit, was now a small but potent act of civil disobedience. It was a secret middle finger to Cromwell and the Puritan government. It was a declaration that, in the privacy of your own home, you were still loyal to the old ways. People got creative. They would celebrate Christmas in secret, behind closed shutters and locked doors. They would hold their feasts quietly, hoping the neighbors wouldn't report them. The mince pie became a shibboleth, a secret sign of shared defiance. Offering a visitor a slice of mince pie in late December was a way of testing their loyalties. Would they accept sharing in your illegal celebration? Or would they refuse, revealing themselves as a government sympathizer? The backlash to the ban sometimes spilled out into the open. In cities like Canterbury and Norwich, pro-Christmas riots broke out. Mobs of apprentices and traditionalists would forcibly close shops that had opened on December 25th, decorating the doors with holly and ivy in defiance of the law. These Christmas riots were a serious challenge to the new government's authority, showing just how deeply the tradition was cherished. Here's a quirky and persistent myth that grew out of this period that mince pies themselves were made illegal. Even today, you'll sometimes hear people joke that it's technically illegal to eat a mince pie on Christmas Day in England. This isn't true. The law never specifically banned the pie itself. It banned the celebration of Christmas, but because the pie was so intrinsically linked to the celebration, it became illegal by association. You weren't arrested for possession of a pie, but you could certainly get in trouble if that pie was part of an illicit Christmas feast. The pie was the evidence of the crime, not the crime itself. Historians still debate the effectiveness of the ban. In London and other Puritan strongholds, it was probably quite strictly enforced, but in the countryside, in villages far from the watchful eyes of the authorities, many people likely carried on as best they could. The lord of the manor might not host a great public feast, but private celebrations undoubtedly continued. The pie simply went underground. This period of prohibition had a lasting effect on the pie's identity. It was forced to become more discreet. The overt, in your face, religious symbolism of the manger shape in the pastry Jesus was now dangerous. It was evidence of popish idolatry. If you were going to bake a pie in secret, you might not want to make it look like a nativity scene. The pie needed a disguise to survive, and so it began to change its shape. A process that would continue even after the festival was restored. For over a decade, you and your fellow citizens live in this strange cultural limbo. The most joyful time of the year has become a source of tension and suspicion. The smell of baking, once a sign of community and celebration, is now the scent of potential rebellion. That the Puritan Commonwealth was a fragile, unpopular republic, held together by the force of Cromwell's personality, and when he died, the whole experiment began to crumble. The people of England had had enough of sober, joyless Wednesdays in December. They wanted their king, and they wanted their Christmas back. The years of Puritan rule were a cold, grey winter for the mince pie. It survived, but it did so in secret, huddled behind closed doors. This period of enforced discretion had a profound and lasting impact on its appearance. The pie, in order to avoid the wrath of the authorities, had to shed its most obvious and incriminating features. It needed a new, more modest identity. The most significant change was the shape. For centuries, the pie's signature look was the long, rectangular coffin or manger. This was its most overt piece of religious symbolism, a direct link to the nativity story, but under a regime that condemned such things as popish idolatry. Baking a pie that looked like a manger was like writing a confession. It was needlessly provocative. So bakers started to make their pies round. A round pie is innocuous. It's just a pie. It doesn't scream Catholic superstition in the same way a manger minus shaped one does. This shift was a pragmatic act of self-preservation. It was a form of culinary camouflage. By stripping the pie of its most obvious religious association, you made it less of a target. You could, perhaps, pass it off as just a regular meat pie, not a specific, illegal Christmas pie. Alongside the new shape came a new size. The great, communal pies of the Tudor era, designed to be the centerpiece of a lord's feasting table, were not practical for a secret celebration. A huge, ostentatious pie was hard to hide. Instead, the trend shifted towards smaller, individual minus-sized pies. These were much more discreet. They could be baked more quickly, distributed more easily among trusted friends and family, and consumed without drawing too much attention. This downsizing also made the pie more personal. It was no longer just a slice from a great communal dish, but a whole pie, just for you. This change would stick. The move towards small, round, individual mince pies, which began as a necessity during the interregnum, would become the standard form that we still recognize today. The decorations also became more subdued. The elaborate pastry sculptures, and especially the little pastry figure of the baby Jesus, vanished. They were far too risky. A simple pastry lid, perhaps with a star shape cut into the top, was a much safer bet. A star was a sufficiently ambiguous symbol. Yes, it could be the Star of Bethlehem, but it could also just be a star. It had plausible deniability. This tradition of a star-minus-up mince pie is a direct echo of this need for more subtle symbolism. Historians debate how quickly these changes happened and how widespread they were. It was likely a gradual process. In staunchly royalist areas, some people may have defiantly continued to make manger-minus-shaped pies as a point of pride. But the general trend, driven by caution and pragmatism, was towards the smaller, rounder, less overtly religious form. The pie was learning to keep its head down. Here's a fascinating little side note about shapes and symbolism. An old folk tradition, likely originating a bit later, but with roots in this period, claimed that the mince pie should contain 13 ingredients, representing Jesus and the 12 apostles. This is almost certainly a later invention, a bit of quaint folklore, as medieval and Tudor recipes show a huge variation in the number of ingredients. But it shows how people were trying to find new, less obvious ways to imbue their festive food religious meaning, moving the symbolism from the external shape to the internal composition. The pie was not just changing its shape and size. The very context of its consumption was altered. It had been a food of public feasting, of great halls and communal celebration. Now, it was a food of the private sphere, of the family hearth. It became associated with domesticity, with the secret, cherished traditions that take place within the four walls of your own home. This, too, would have a lasting legacy, cementing the mince pie's status as a quintessential food of the family Christmas. So, during this decade-minus-long ban, the pie went through a forced evolution. It shrank, it became round, it lost its most flamboyant decorations. It retreated from the public square into the private home. It learned to whisper its Christmas message instead of shouting it. It was a leaner, more discreet version of its former self, a survivor adapted to a hostile environment. But the political winds were about to change once again. The king was coming home. and with him, he would bring back the joyful noise that had been missing from England for so long. In 1660, the Puritan experiment collapses. The monarchy is restored, and Charles I, the son of the executed Charles I, returns from exile to reclaim the throne. The event, known as the Restoration, is met with a wave of national euphoria. After years of enforced sobriety and austerity, England is ready to party, and the king, a man famous for his love of pleasure, theatre, and merriment, is more than happy to lead the celebrations. He becomes known as the Merry Monarch. With the king's return, Christmas comes roaring back to life. The laws banning the festival are repealed. Theatres, which had been closed by the Puritans, reopen. Dancing, singing, and feasting are not just permitted again, they are practically a patriotic duty. To celebrate Christmas with gusto is to celebrate the return of the king and the rejection of that dreary, grey decade of Republican rule. And the mince pie, it comes out of hiding. It can once again be baked, sold, and eaten openly, without fear of reprisal. It quickly establishes itself as the essential taste of the newly revived Christmas season. Writers and diarists of the period, like the famous Samuel Pepys, joyfully record eating brave and excellent mince pies as part of their Christmas feasts. The pie is bad, but it isn't the same pie. The version that emerges from the shadows is the one that was forged during the years of Prohibition. It's the smaller, round, individual-sized pie. The big, rectangular, manger-shaped coffin of the Tudor and early Stuart era does not make a comeback. It has become old-fashioned, a relic of a bygone age. The new, more convenient, more discreet form is now the standard. The pie has been permanently changed by its time in hiding. The filling, however, is still proudly and defiantly meaty. Mince pies of the Restoration period are packed with minced beef or mutton, salt, spices, and fruit. In fact, if anything, they might have become even more luxurious as people celebrated their newfound freedom. Recipes from the era show a continued love for it. Complex fillings, often with a healthy dose of wine or brandy mixed in for good measure. This is a key point, even after a decade of Puritan condemnation. The pie did not immediately shed its meaty core. The idea that a mince pie should contain meat was still deeply ingrained. But the balance continues its slow, inexorable shift. The amount of sugar and fruit in the recipe steadily increases, while the meat, though still present, is beginning to feel less like the star of the show and more like a member of the supporting cast. There's a fascinating historical debate about the great pie tradition. While the day to dame inspired become a small, round affair, there are records from the Restoration and the following century of gigantic, monumental pies being baked for special occasions, almost as a form of political theatre. For example, in 1770, a huge pie was sent from Newcastle to London as a gift for the king. It reportedly weighed over 200 pounds, required 2 men to carry it, and was so large it had to be placed on a specially designed carriage. Was this a genuine continuation of the old medieval tradition, or was it a new, self-conscious form of antiquarian showmanship? A deliberate attempt to be old-fashioned and impressive. Historians lean towards the latter. These monster pies were the exception, a novelty item, not the norm. The future of the pie was small and round. A curious little legal footnote from this era in some towns. Local laws related to the Puritan period were slow to be repealed. This has contributed to the persistent, though incorrect, urban myth that mince pies remain illegal. These were outdated, unenforced local rules, not national laws, but they add a fun, quirky layer to the pie's rebellious history. The mince pie of the late 17th century, therefore, is a fascinating hybrid. It has the new, discreet shape born of Puritan oppression, but it's filled with the boozy, meaty, celebratory excess of the Restoration. It's a survivor that has come out of hiding and is ready to celebrate, but it still bears the scars of its persecution. It's a food that perfectly encapsulates the contradictions of its time, a desire to return to old traditions, but an inability to escape the changes of the recent past. This version of the pie round, individual, but still containing a savory minus sweet mix of meat, fruit, and spice would remain the standard for the next century. But another, even more powerful force was gathering on the horizon. It was a force that would finally accomplish what the Puritans never could. It would drive the meat out of the mince pie for good, and that force was sugar. You glide forward into the 18th century, the Georgian era. This is the age of powdered wigs, coffee houses, and the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It's also the age when Britain's relationship with sugar undergoes a seismic transformation, and the mince pie is standing right in the path of a tidal wave of sweetness. For centuries, sugar was a luxury. In the Georgian period, it becomes a commodity. The engine of this change is the transatlantic slave trade and the vast sugar plantations of the British West Indies, particularly Jamaica and Barbados. The brutal, exploitative system of enslaved labor produces sugar on an unprecedented scale. This flood of cheap, slave-produced sugar pours into Britain, and it changes everything about the way people eat. What was once a status symbol for the rich now becomes an everyday ingredient for the growing middle class, and eventually, even a staple for the poor. People start putting sugar in their tea, a newly popular beverage. They eat sweetened cakes, biscuits, and puddings. The British palate, which had long favored the medieval sweet minus and minus savory combination, develops an insatiable craving for pure, unadulterated sweetness. Dessert has a distinct, separate, sweet course at the end of a meal, becomes a standard feature of dining, rather than a jumble of sweet and savory dishes served all at once. This is the cultural shift that finally pushes the meat out of the mince pie. As sugar becomes cheaper and more abundant, it no longer needs the salty, savory contrast of the meat to shine. In fact, to the newly refined Georgian palate, the combination of meat and sugar starts to seem a bit, well, old minus fashion, a bit rustic, a bit medieval. The transformation is gradual, but you can trace it clearly through the cookbooks of the century. At the start of the 1700s, recipes for mince pies, like those by the celebrated food writer Henry Glassy, still list beef tongue or minced sirloin as a primary ingredient. But as the century wears on, the amount of meat specified in recipes begins to shrink. It becomes an optional, almost token inclusion. Then, a crucial substitution starts to appear. Recipes begin to suggest that if you don't want to use meat, you can use extra suet. The suet, that familiar, hard animal fat, provides the richness and mouthfeel that people expect from a mince pie, but without the actual meaty flavor. This meaty texture, provided by the suet and the chopped nuts and fruit, is the ghost of the pie's former self. By the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th, the meat has all but vanished from most recipes. The pie has completed its long journey. It has crossed the great culinary divide from the savory main course to the sweet dessert trolley. The filling is now what we would recognize today, a mixture of soup, a mountain of dried and candied fruits like currants, raisins, and citrus peel, a constellation of spices, a good deal of sugar, and a generous dousing of brandy or rum. The name, however, remains as a stubborn historical clue. It's still called a mince pie, and the filling is called mincemeat. This confuses people even today. You buy a jar of mincemeat and expect, not unreasonably, to find minced meat in it, but instead, you find a sweet, sticky, fruity gel. The name is a fossil. It's a linguistic ghost that points directly back to the centuries when minced mutton or beef was the star ingredient. Historians still have a small, friendly debate about the very last holdouts of the meaty pie. When did the last true mince pie, containing actual flesh, finally disappear from common practice? It's impossible to pinpoint an exact date. It likely persisted for much longer in rural, more traditional households, where the waste not, what not principle was still paramount. A farmer with a freshly slaughtered cow might well have continued to add a bit of minced beef to the Christmas pie well into the 19th century. But in the fashionable cookbooks and the urban kitchens that set the trends, the meat was gone, the sugar had won. This wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a sweet, seductive conquest. The pie didn't lose its meat because of a law or a religious edict. It lost its meat because taste changed. They knew globalized economy, built on the back of a horrific trade, had made one ingredient so cheap and desirable that it rewrote the recipe book of an entire nation. The pie had survived religious reformers and government bans, but it couldn't survive the sweet tooth of the Georgian era. It had been transformed, tamed, and relegated the dessert course, but its story wasn't quite over. It still needed one final makeover to become the Christmas icon we know today. You arrive in the 19th century, a world of steam, iron, and empire. This is Victorian England. The pie has completed its transition into a sweet, meat-free dessert. It's popular, it's festive, but it's just one part of the Christmas celebration. No, it's about to be swept up in a grand reinvention of the entire holiday. A transformation that will cement its status, and the status of Christmas itself, in the popular imagination forever. At the beginning of the 19th century, Christmas was a relatively low-key affair for many. The old 12-day carnival had faded, and for the workers flooding into the new industrial cities, it was often just a single day off work. If that, it was the Victorians, with their unique blend of industrial wealth, more earnestness, and a deep-seated nostalgia for a merrier old England, who created the modern Christmas, and to people, more than any others, became the architects of this new tradition, a young queen and a famous novelist. First, you have Queen Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert, in 1848. The Illustrated London News published a drawing of the royal family gathered around a decorated evergreen tree at Windsor Castle. Albert had brought the German tradition of the Christmas tree with him, and this one picture turned it from a minor Germanic custom into the absolute height of fashion. Suddenly, every middle-class family in Britain had to have a Christmas tree. The Victorians, obsessed with the home and the family as a sacred unit, latched onto this as the perfect centerpiece for a new, child-centric Christmas celebration. Then, you have Charles Dickens. In 1843, he published A Christmas Carol. It's impossible to overstate the impact of this book. It wasn't just a ghost story. It was a powerful moral fable that perfectly captured the Victorian desire for social reform, charity, and sentimental family gatherings. The story of Scrooge's redemption, the vision of the Cratchit family's humble but joyful feast, and the overall message of goodwill and generosity became the definitive script for how Christmas should be celebrated. Dickens didn't invent the Christmas spirit, but he packaged it, marketed it, and sold it back to the public more effectively than anyone before or since. In this new, family-focused, nostalgic Victorian Christmas, the mince pie found its perfect home. It was already a food of tradition and domesticity, thanks to its journey through the 17th and 18th centuries. Now, it became an essential prop in this new Christmas drama. To serve mince pies was to participate in that merry old England that people read about in novels. It was a taste of history, a link to a simpler, more wholesome past that, ironically, was far from simple or wholesome. The pie's recipe solidified into the form we know today. The Victorian era was the golden age of the cookbook, with formidable domestic goddesses like Mrs. Beaton publishing massive tomes that standardized recipes for the aspiring middle class. Her famous book of household management, 1861, includes a recipe for mincemeat that is definitively modern suit. Apples, raisins, currants, candied peel, almonds, sugar, and a complex blend of spices, all soaked in brandy. The meat is now a distant memory, occasionally mentioned in historical footnotes, but firmly absent from the actual ingredient list. There is, however, still a small debate among food historians about the suit. Was the suit in a Victorian mince pie seen as a final, ghostly remnant of the pie's meaty past, or was it just considered a standard baking fat, like butter or not? The answer is likely the latter. By this point, suit was so established as an ingredient for puddings and pastries that its connection to a savory joint of meat was probably not at the forefront of the baker's mind. It was just the right fat to use for that characteristic rich, moist texture. The Victorians also layered new folklore onto the pie. A popular superstition that flourished in this era was that you should eat one mince pie on each of the 12 days of Christmas, starting on Christmas Day, to ensure 12 months of good luck in the coming year. This was a charming new custom that encouraged, conveniently, the consumption of a great many pies. So, by the end of the 19th century, the process is complete. The mince pie has been fully integrated into the Dickensian Christmas. It's no longer a main course, a religious statement, or an act of rebellion. It's a sweet, sentimental, nostalgic treat, an essential part of a family-focused holiday that is itself a modern invention masquerading as an ancient tradition. The pie has found its final, enduring role, but even in its modern form, it still carries the echoes of its long, strange journey. And so here you are, back in the present day. You're standing in a brightly lit kitchen, or maybe wandering down the festive aisle of a supermarket. In your hand, you hold a modern mince pie. It's small, round, and neatly machine-made. The pastry is probably a light, buttery short crust, a far cry from the sturdy soup-flour coffin of its ancestor. It looks simple, sweet, and unassuming, but if you know its history, you can see the ghosts. Every part of this little pie is a clue, a whisper of its long and turbulent past. First, look at the name on the box, mince pies, and the jar of filling next to it, mincemeat. This is the most obvious ghost, the big linguistic fossil that has survived all these centuries. The name makes no logical sense anymore. There is no minced meat in it. Yet, we all accept it. That name is a direct, unbroken link back to the 13th century, to a time when finely chopped, salted mutton or beef was the heart and soul of the pie. It's a stubborn linguistic relic that has outlived the ingredient it describes. Now, look at the filling itself. It's a dark, glistening, sticky mixture of fruit and spices. The fruits raisins, saltiness. Currants are the descendants of those precious raisins of Corinth that medieval merchants brought back from the east. They are a faint echo of a time when any fruit that wasn't a local apple or pear was a symbol of exotic luxury. The candied peel, the little bright chunks of orange and lemon, are a nod to the Tudors and their growing obsession with sugar and new, fashionable ingredients from the Mediterranean. Then there's the soup. Even today, traditional mincemeat recipes call for soup or a vegetable-based substitute. This isn't just for texture. That small amount of animal fat is the last remaining whisper of the pie's meaty soul. It's the final, stubborn remnant of the time when the pie was a savory, substantial dish, packed with rendered animal fat for calories and preservation. It connects your modern dessert directly to the slaughtered cow or sheep of a medieval farmer. And the spices, you can smell them, even through the packaging. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. These are the ghosts of the Magi. They are the spectral remains of a time when spices were worth more than gold, when their inclusion was both an act of conspicuous consumption and pious, edible sermon representing the gifts brought to the infant Jesus. Every time you get that warm, spicy hit from a mince pie, you are tasting the legacy of the Venetian spice straight into the deep religious symbolism of the Middle Ages. The shape and size tell a story, too. Why is it small and round, and not a big, rectangular slab? Because of the Puritans, you are holding a pie that was shaped by religious persecution. Its discrete, individual form is a direct result of the years when celebrating Christmas was illegal, and the pie had to go into hiding. It shed its obvious manger shape to survive, and it never went back. That roundness is the scar tissue of the English Civil War. Even the little star on top has a history. It's the ghost of the ostentatious pastry sculptures of the past. It's the most subdued, most deniable religious symbol that could survive the Puritan era. A quiet nod to the Star of Bethlehem that wouldn't get you fined or thrown in jail. Historians might still argue about the finer details of this evolution. Was the move to round pies purely down to the Puritans, or was it also part of a broader shift in culinary fashion? It's almost certainly a combination of both, but the historical pressure of the interregnum was a powerful catalyst. The pie's history is a perfect storm of interacting forces. So this little mass-produced pie in your hand, isn't just a sweet treat. It's a museum exhibit. It's a survivor. It has endured religious reform, civil war, changing tastes, and the rise and fall of empires. It started as a status symbol, became a religious icon, transformed into an act of rebellion, and was finally repackaged by the Victorians as a symbol of domestic nostalgia. It carries the memory of meat, the echo of piety, and the shadow of prohibition. It's an edible time capsule, and to truly understand it, all you have to do is take a bite. You take a bite, the pastry crumbles light, sweet, buttery, then comes the filling. It's an intense wave of flavor. The deep, charming sweetness of the raisins and currants, the slightly bitter, aromatic notes of the citrus peel, and the warm, complex perfume of the spices. You can feel the rich, satisfying texture that the soup provides, a substance that links you directly back to the most ancient kitchens. It's a taste that is instantly, profoundly familiar. It tastes like Christmas. But now, you understand that you're not just tasting sugar and fruit. You are, in a very real sense, tasting history. That single bite is the culmination of an 800-year story. You're tasting the medieval peasant's desperate need to preserve his most valuable food source, the autumn slaughter through the harshest months of the winter. The ghost of that salted, minced mutton is right there, and the name mincemeat. You're tasting the incredible wealth and power of the spice trade. The cinnamon and nutmeg on your tongue undertook a journey across continents, passing through the hands of countless merchants, their value inflating with every mile. They are a relic of a time when flavor was a form of treasure, a direct link to the gifts of the Magi and a world connected by sea routes and camel caravans. You're tasting the religious fervor of the Middle Ages, the desire to imbue every aspect of life, even food, with sacred meaning. The memory of the manger-shaped coffin and the pastry Christ-child lingers in the pie's festive identity. You're tasting the sweet tooth of the Tudors, the era when sugar began its slow conquest of the English palate, elbowing the meat aside to make more room for candied fruit and imported luxuries. You're tasting the bitter cultural and political divisions of the 17th century. The pie's small, round shape is a testament to the years it spent in hiding, a culinary refugee from Puritan zealots. It's a food that became a symbol of resistance, an edible act of defiance against a government that tried to cancel Christmas. You're tasting the restoration and the joyful return of feasting. The moment the pie could come out of the shadows, blinking in the sudden light, forever changed by its ordeal but still defiantly festive. You're tasting the immense economic and social changes of the 18th century, the final victory of sugar, powered by a brutal colonial economy, which completed the pie's transformation from a savory main course to a sweet dessert. And finally, you're tasting the sentimental nostalgia of the Victorians. You're tasting Dickens and Prince Albert. You are tasting the invention of the modern, family-focused Christmas, a cultural phenomenon that took this ancient, battle-scarred pie and polished it into a shiny, essential icon of domestic bliss and festive cheer. Historians will, of course, continue to debate the nuances. They'll argue about the precise moment the meat became a minority ingredient, or how much the average medieval peasant really understood the symbolism of the spices. These are the fascinating, ongoing conversations that keep history alive. But the broad sweep of the story is there, baked into the very DNA of the pie. So, the next time you eat a mince pie, take a moment, appreciate it not just as a festive snack, but as a survivor. This humble little pastry is one of the most remarkable historical documents you will ever eat. It has quietly witnessed centuries of war, revolution, and social change, adapting and evolving to survive, yet always carrying the ghosts of its past within its sweet, spicy heart. It's more than just a pie. It's a bite-sized piece of history. A story that starts with a slab of salted meat in a cold, dark hut and ends right here, with you, in a moment of war, sweet, festive comfort. And so, the story of the pie comes to a gentle close. The journey through the centuries is over. The smoky huts and grand halls, the bustling fairs and quiet, candlelit kitchens, they all begin to soften and fade. like watercolor paintings left in a soft rain. The echoes of history, once so clear the clang of a butcher's knife, the fervent sermon of a Puritan preacher, the laughter in a Victorian parlor, they all mellow into a single, peaceful hum, a gentle background murmur, like the sound of a distant fan on a quiet night. You can feel the weight of the day, and of the centuries, begin to lift. Your mind, which has been traveling through time, can now come to rest. The path you walked, from the mud of the 13th century to the gaslight of the 19th, has led you here, to this quiet, comfortable place. There are no more dates to remember, no more debates to follow. There is only the soft, lingering sweetness of the story's end. The taste of the pie is now just a pleasant memory, a faint whisper of spice and warmth as you drift, slowly, gently, into a peaceful and well-mined assurance. The story is over, and now it is time to dream. The end of the article. Good night.